Jedi Survivor. What an experience. This game was truly great, top to bottom. But before I get into what I really enjoyed about this game, I cannot go any further without talking about the performance and bugs. Performance here really was not great. I played on PS5 and the first patch released about halfway or 2/3 into my playthrough, which in my opinion had little to no effect. In fact, according to Cataferal, I probably butchered that name, on Twitter, this first patch actually made things worse by about 1 FPS. Frame rate to me felt like it was hovering around the 40 to 45 range at all times. I remember one moment where the frame rate just seemingly jumped up to 60, and it felt like the most incredible, smoothest thing ever for about 3 seconds. Then it just sunk back down to the 40 to 45 range. Now, I'm not a tech guy. I'm not Digital Foundry or Linus or these other tech channels. I don't have the tools to measure these things. So I could be completely wrong in my perception, and it may have hit 60 FPS more than I realised. In terms of bugs, my experience here was minimal. I didn't really have much. I had a few visual bugs, like this one where for some reason when you first get Cal's blaster stance, the blaster itself was completely detached from his model and moving around as I moved Cal. Most of these were fixed by stance switching or changing something in general. The absolute worst visual issue, I say issue because I don't believe this to be a bug in a traditional sense, was the ghosting on bright backgrounds. I assume it's everywhere regardless of brightness, but it's very prominent and easily seen on the bright backgrounds. If this performance and the bugs on PC get fixed, this game is one of the best games of the year so far. So, let's get into what I really did enjoy, barring the issues. Let's start with gameplay. This for me was a mixed bag. There are times where you'll fight 2, maybe 3 enemies, and it just feels amazing. You feel like a master Jedi that can handle these situations. But then there are situations where you have 4, maybe 5 of the tougher enemies in the game. Then you also have multiple enemies up above or behind everything, shooting at you. And these encounters just make the, in my opinion, great and tight systems just fall apart. Especially from Grandmaster difficulty. That difficulty mode has to be the most temperamental, hardest difficulty in a long time. For example, let's take spawn of Ogdo Bogdo. The window to parry his basic bite attack felt so thin on Grandmaster, I was convinced you couldn't parry it at all. Later on in my playthrough, I did turn the difficulty down to Jedi Master, 1 below, and I was parrying that same attack perfectly. For a first playthrough, I heavily recommend a Jedi Master playthrough. It feels, at times it feels too easy, but you're going to have so much more fun. Exploration was also a big part of the gameplay loop. I'm very indifferent on this. Most of the content blocked by later story power upgrades like the dash only really lead to cosmetics or health and force meter upgrades, which is nice for sure. Definitely better than Fallen Order and the ponchos. I just wish there was more side content to actually discover. For example, I would have liked to have seen a dungeon that you can explore somewhere to find, and it's intended to be taken on after you've beaten the game, after you've got most of the upgrades, and it just tests you. During my playthrough, there was a time where you go through an abandoned village type thing, and towards the end of the walk, you find this, you can jump up somewhere and find this huge fan. and it's blowing and you can't jump over because it pushes you out. This is the first, and from what I remember, only time outside the planet you get this power, which would be Jedi, that you use it for wind-related traversal. I spent maybe 20-30 minutes trying to figure out what I was supposed to do to progress that jump. If wind-related things like this were scattered around Kobo more, or that general area, it would indicate to the player better that you come back later. If you're not finding meter upgrades whilst exploring, you find legendary bosses. These are just normal enemies that are a boss now. This is really disappointing to me because it is literally just the same enemy you have fought 4, 5, maybe 6 times already. But now this time you fight it again with more HP, and some of them have maybe one new attack. But from the ones I can think of off the top of my head, the attacks are so easily dealt with, it may as well just not even bother with it. And at the end, you get an extra stim. Nothing else. It just exists as a small roadblock to getting an upgrade. And some of them have a normal version of the boss in the arena to artificially inflate the difficulty. Overall, gameplay is pretty good and satisfying, especially in boss fights, 1v1 boss fights, but the exploration is lackluster and, in my opinion, ultimately pointless. Having a little bit more linearity to the game would have been a bit nicer, especially in Kobo, even though I'm not complaining about the openness of it. Next up is the story. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because this is, in my opinion, some of the best Star Wars content in at least recent memory. It's just so good. The first, maybe third of the game has a little too much going back and forth to just get pieces moving into place for the rest of the story. But once all those pieces are in place, it just does not stop. It just goes up and up and up. It is so good. It hits every note perfectly. Nothing overstays its welcome, and all the characters just feel organic and like they all have relationships and they all have a story to tell each other in the 5-year time skip. It's great and nothing feels out of place. So, how am I scoring this? I'm not. This is my first review on the channel, but what I am going to do is recommendations. I don't particularly like giving scores because I think the content of a review is more important, than an actual numbered score. Right now, in the current state of performance, I just cannot recommend you buy this game. If you really, 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 really love Star Wars, then maybe look at getting it, maybe a bit cheaper. But honestly, just wait for the issues to be fixed, because this game is going to be a far better experience when the frame rate is fixed and it's running at like constant 60 FPS. And if you play on PC, it's going to be even better experience when it's not a buggy, broken mess.